but I still remember what it felt like. And I still remember being in the middle of it and how scared I was of losing my kids, how worried I was that they were kind of being poisoned as far as what they were being told about me. And that was tough. So I get it. And, I'm happy to be here and to kind of share my story with your audience.
Yeah, thank you for jumping on the podcast, man. I actually just listened to your latest episode, the one that you just put out today, I believe, and it's spot on. What made you want to start a podcast?
I'm basically using my podcast as the main forum for producing content to build an audience, to just kind of communicate to people. But the motivation behind it is that I'm a single dad and I just feel called to serve other single fathers. And I feel like there's a big gap that exists in that, in society. And so I just kind of wanted to step into that. So I've been a single dad for a long time now, about 13 and a half, almost 14 years. And I have 5 daughters. I started off co-parenting and now I am parenting solo because of kind of a series of events that happened a while ago that we can go into further, when we're diving into that. But I just really wanted to kind of share my story, to share my experiences. And I've become really obsessed with learning everything I can possibly learn about being a single father and, kind of taking ownership and control over your life and really not making excuses for the things that have happened in the past, recognizing how those events might have affected you, but not making excuses for what you do moving forward. And so really that's kind of the direction I try to take it. And I share a combination of my experiences with also things that I've learned along the way.
Yeah, and it's tough, man. It's tough for dads. I started obviously a podcast and because I was going through such a rough time with mine, and I have 2 daughters, and it was just so frustrating because guys, it doesn't seem like they really talk about their emotions or even talk to other people about what they're going through. But then I jumped on, a couple Facebook groups, and I was surprised to see how many dads were out there looking for, answers and questions that they had, or just to talk to other dads that are going through something similar, just to have, an emotional connection with someone else that's, going through the same thing. So yeah, it's pretty crazy how many dads are going through it, but at the same time, you don't hear about it much.
You don't hear about it much, and then you also don't hear a lot of fathers such as yourself and what I'm trying to do that are willing to be vulnerable with their story and
Exactly.
be vulnerable with the pain that they've experienced. And quite honestly, for me, I'll speak for myself, for the many, many mistakes I've made along the way, and so I recognize that, but I can only point to what I'm going to do moving forward. And so I believe in looking back for the purpose of learning and taking responsibility. And if you need to, for making amends for mistakes that I've made. But my focus is always forward, from this point forward, what can I do? And I think that extends to everything. And I have listened to several of your podcasts over these last few weeks, and there's some men out there that have some really tough stories as well, and that are right smack in the middle of it, a lot of them. And I'm fortunate that I'm kind of on the other side of a lot of that. I'm on the other side of the custody disputes that I had and all of the court stuff that took place a while back. And, it gives me a different perspective, but I still remember what it felt like. And I still remember being in the middle of it and how scared I was of losing my kids, how worried I was that they were kind of being poisoned as far as what they were being told about me. And that was tough. So I get it. And, I'm happy to be here and to kind of share my story with your audience.
Yeah, well, thank you. And let's jump right in if you want to introduce yourself and then tell us a little bit about your situation or your story.
Yeah. So I'm Rob Rhodey, and I am a single father of five daughters. And I am also the host of the Business of Being Dad podcast that I created, like you, to serve other single fathers that are out there. And, my story really goes back many, many years ago. And I became a single father about 14 years ago. And it was a situation where I was married for about 10 years. I had five daughters with my wife, and things weren't working out, and we kind of started heading our own direction, heading our own way. And when we split apart, I remember well, like, what that was like, because I was working a lot, and I was still involved with the kids quite a bit, but kind of in my own way. And what I mean by that is there were certain things that my wife took care of, and there were certain things that I did, and we just kind of migrated into certain roles over a period of time. But we were both involved in our kids' life. But that moment that I became a single father, it just hit me and felt like something I had never experienced before. All of a sudden, the anxiety that I felt and the overwhelm that I felt, and kind of the responsibility is really the best word to put it. The responsibility I had for helping raise these daughters as a man and trying to do my best to do right by them. And I will say that from the beginning, my wife and I had struggles as far as custody, and we had struggles as far as what my role would be in the kid's life. But I am very fortunate that within probably about a year, we were able to settle into a routine where we each had the kids 50% of the time. And
Nice.
I know, yeah, and I know that that's not always the case. And I completely get that. I recognize that I was fortunate, both based on the area that I live, which is Colorado, which tends to lean towards 50-50 custody whenever possible. But that doesn't mean it wasn't difficult. I was paying loads in child support and paying loads in what they call maintenance, basically alimony as well. And so even though I had the kids 50% of the time, prior to us getting separated and then divorced, I was kind of the sole provider. And so I was the one working, and I worked a lot of hours because we set up our house that way as a joint decision. We set it up that way to try to minimize the amount of daycare we needed to use, to try to kind of minimize how often the kids would be kind of raised by other people other than myself or my wife at the time. But since we had set up that lifestyle, I was working a lot and I was happy to do it. But then when we were going through the separation, the courts kind of viewed that as us establishing a certain lifestyle. And that lifestyle meant that we were making a certain amount of income. And it was difficult for me to work that same amount and still be a good parent to the kids during the times when I had them.
Right, as a single dad, it's hard to maintain that lifestyle. You have to work to get that money to then pay her, but then it's also you have the kids 50-50, so it's how do you expect me to do that?
Exactly. And at the time, I was working in healthcare, and I worked night shift. And so I couldn't work on the days that I had the kids. And so that was another challenge. And one other piece that fit in, at least to our situation here in Colorado, is that our youngest daughter was less than less than 3 years old at the time, and so my wife was not obligated to work. And I'm not arguing that situation. That's just what it was. But she was viewed as the primary caregiver leading up to that, and so in terms, that's how I ended up paying so much in alimony, is because she was not required to work. So our joint income was really still just my income at that point. And so I had to essentially give her approximately half of that, and then on top of that pay a certain amount of child support. And so it was a challenge financially, and I don't wish that on anyone. And I it's hard to even go back and explain how I got through all of it because I was in a dark place for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was sitting in this place of just being upset at everything and everyone. Um, I remember a really specific situation when I went to, so I guess I need to start at this point. My daughters at the time of the separation were, quite a bit younger than they are now. Right now, they are ages approximately 15 to 28. And so, a while ago, my youngest was pretty young, but the 28-year-olds were teenagers. And I had a somewhat strained relationship with them at that point anyway. I mean, I loved them, they loved me, but we didn't connect as well. And that's just the reality of the situation at that point. Well, I remember driving on my way to pick up my daughters for their parenting time with me. And I remember kind of thinking about that and thinking, you know what? I get that they're upset at me, but man, I am trying here. I know I'm working a ton. I know that I'm not as patient as I should be, or I need to always be. And I know that they blame me because I was the one who left. I was the one who chose to leave. And so I know they blame me for the divorce and the situation. And I was in a small little apartment with 5 daughters trying to create that situation, and they were teenagers. So I got it. But I remember as I was driving over there thinking, okay, I've got to figure this out because I care so much about these kids. I got to make this right. And as I pull into the driveway, like these thoughts were racing through my head. I remember thinking, okay, Rob, this time you're going to do it different. This time you're going to be so patient. This time you're going to put all of your work stuff aside and just focus on the kids. This time, I was going to do it better. And then my heart kind of stopped as my ex-wife walks up to the car alone and tells me that my oldest daughters aren't coming over, that they're upset at me and they don't want to spend time with me. And I felt like a complete failure. My own daughters didn't even want to hang out with me. And so that was really, really tough.
Now, was there any like alienation or anything like that? Like, was your ex saying things to them, or they just really disliked you at the time because they thought you were the reason why their family split?
I don't know that I will ever know fully what took place, but those are the thoughts that were racing through my head for sure. I think that it was a combination of things, if I'm being honest. But my immediate feeling was anger and resentment, and then also just sadness. And like I said, kind of feeling like a failure. But that quickly shifted to some of the things you're talking about. I immediately kind of started thinking, like, what is she saying about me? What is her mom saying about me that's making them feel this way? And I was upset. I was upset at her for that, and I was blaming her for that. And I was blaming my job because I was working all this overtime and kind of being forced to. And I was kind of even blaming my daughters because I'm like, you guys are teenagers. You don't appreciate what I'm doing for you. And I was just kind of sitting in this place. That's just where I was at that time.
It's so hard. It's so hard. Even like my daughter, same thing. I mean, she's 14, and I'm trying really, really hard because I understand where her emotions are coming from and how she's feeling. But at the same time, it's like, do you see how hard like I'm working to try to, I want you to feel okay. I want you to be good. I want you to be a kid, enjoy your childhood growing up. And the same type of emotions that she's having, she puts on me. But it is a lot of alienation on my side. So
Yeah. And I am assuming that there was some of that going on because it was a somewhat of a volatile split up. And, during that initial period of time, especially those first couple of years, it was not a smooth ride between my ex-wife and I. I mean, I was trying if I'm being honest, I think she was too. And I think part of it was, it's just that there's a lot of hurt. There's a lot of anger on both sides. And I'm not going to pretend that I was so noble that I recognized all that in the moment. But as I'm thinking back, I think I recognized that she was feeling probably a lot of the things I was feeling, but I wasn't seeing any of that at the time. All I was seeing at the time was she's talking trash about me, and the girls are hearing this, and now they're thinking this. But they were also teenagers, and they were old enough, 14, 15, kind of like you mentioned with your daughter, that they're kind of old enough to start making some of their own decisions, to start kind of recognizing things on their own. And it just gets that will grow over time. But the direction I chose to take that, not right away, but I chose to take a look at the things that I was able to control and the things that I could do. And so there was a long period of time where my oldest girls, who were twins, where they didn't come over and see me hardly at all, or if they did, it was just for a dinner here or a dinner there. But the things that I was able to control was to stay patient, to not make them feel like they were wrong for their feelings that they were having or the things that they were doing. The other things I was able to control is to keep asking them to come over, to keep inviting them over, to keep making sure that they knew that I loved them and I wasn't going away and I was going to be there. Because at that age, it's my opinion that at that age, you can only force them to do so much. If you try to force them, it's going to lead to resentment, and it's going to worsen the situation. And then one other thing I started doing once they started coming over is that I did something that was extremely hard for me to do, and is extremely hard for, I think, any man to do. And that is to just listen and not try to fix them. And so as we were having conversations, but again, they were starting to get a little older at this point. Now they're, 16, almost 17, kind of getting a little bit older. And so I try to just listen and understand them on a deeper level and not try to fix every single problem. And they started to kind of slowly open up over time. But I have to say, it was a commitment to play the long game, to do these things that I knew were the right things to do, regardless of the response that I got. I knew they were the right things to do. But man, I'm not going to pretend that it was easy, and I don't want to gloss over it as if, oh wow, this is such an easy thing to do. That's all I need to do. It takes there were a lot of moments where I'd have those conversations, like I'd invite them over, they wouldn't come, or they'd cancel at the last minute. And I kind of just had to sit with that for a while, and it felt horrible. And, I had to be willing to keep going and to keep the same response and to keep moving forward and to keep kind of trying to do the right thing based on what I felt like they needed. And over time, I'm sharing this because you shared your situation a little bit. I'm sharing this because I did find that over time it started to improve, but it did take time. So I don't want to pretend that it didn't.
Exactly. My daughter, same thing, and it took time, and she's getting so much better now. But just like you said, is like you wanted to fix things. They would tell you something, you'd be like, do it. This is how you do it. Blah blah blah. You're right. They don't want to hear that. They just want you to listen. And my daughter actually said it to me. She's like, "You're not listening to me." Probably when she was like 13. And she just said, "You're not listening to me." And I had to learn to, sit down. And even if I know the answer to this, I know how to solve this, but just listen to what she says. And me and my oldest, our relationship has gotten so much better just in the last like couple months, with just sitting back and listening to her problems and listening to her talk. And she's opened up to me so much. But it's really, really hard to go through that and actually understand that, they just want you to listen to what they have to say, to listen to their issues. Don't try to solve it. So, yeah, but it's painful because it's your kid, you want the best for them. So.
Exactly. And I'm glad to hear that things are improving, because it took a lot longer probably for me. But the moment that I realized that, well, let me backtrack a little bit. One thing that I learned as I was going through that process with those girls is that I started to understand them better. I started to be able to learn how to relate to them better. And, I recognized how almost how little I actually truly knew them. I mean, I knew the things that they liked. I knew their personality a little bit, but I didn't really know like what was going on in their heads. I didn't really know like their motivations, what was driving them and things like that. And so the added bonus that took place, kind of the unintended benefit as I was going through this process, is that I learned my daughters. I studied them and I got to know them better than I previously did. And it's almost embarrassing to admit that, basically admitting that I didn't know them as well as I thought. But when I really knew that things were starting to turn the corner was when they started asking me for my advice and they started asking me for my opinions. And it's not like they asked me and then, oh, everything's fixed and now we always want to know what you think, Dad. It was more like they asked me, but it meant a lot. And then I had to keep spending twice as much or three times as much time listening versus giving, offering my opinions or giving advice.
And you said now you have full custody of them. Well, the older ones are older, but did you say you had full custody now of your kids?
Yeah, and so there's a story there as well that I can share if we have time.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So after, kind of the events I was talking about with my oldest daughters, just as a point of reference, the other three daughters were still 50-50 between me and their mom. It was just the older two daughters where this was kind of a struggle. But after that, we kind of settled into a rhythm, meaning the girl's mom and I kind of settled into a rhythm for a few years. And then she started seeing someone, and all of a sudden, some of these signs started popping up with the girls. Some of the things that they would say that would kind of give me hesitation or make me kind of question, what was going on in that situation. And I'm a father. Nobody has to tell us to protect our daughters. I mean, right? That comes so naturally, especially as they start to get older. And this individual that their mom was dating wouldn't meet me. I mean, he denies that, but I kept trying to show up and trying to be there. And I'd come to the door and I'd knock and he would not meet me. And then they ended up moving in together and I still hadn't met him yet. And I was just very uncomfortable with that situation. And eventually, at one point, my daughters said, Dad, why don't you come in? And I said, well, is so-and-so there? And they said, yeah. I said, well, I need to meet him. I need to meet him today, right now, in this moment. And he was outside at the time as we pull in. And so then I walk in and by the time I get inside the house, he's like upstairs in a different room, door closed. I ended up having to go up the stairs, knock on the door, and kind of tap him on the shoulder because he was facing the other direction after he opened the door. And then reach my hand out to shake his hand and introduce myself. And it was an incredibly awkward and uncomfortable situation. And that did not make me feel more safe and secure
Right.
for my kids. So that was just like this little warning sign. But over the next kind of, gosh, it sounds horrible as I'm saying this out loud, but over the next couple of years, while they were still living together and their mom and I were having these conversations and I was checking in regularly with the kids, eventually some things started happening where I noticed some signs in the kids where one of my daughters was always having these stomach issues that just wouldn't go away. We'd bring her to the doctor. Nothing was diagnosed. They thought it was from anxiety and stress. She was 7 at the time. Another one of my daughters was losing some of her hair in the back and had like a little bit of hair loss and then started having panic attacks. And then the other daughter who was part of that all of a sudden could not, who is extremely social, all of a sudden could not go to other people's houses for sleepovers. And so as this was all surfacing, started seeing a counselor. I reached out to their mom more directly, and essentially, after a series of events that took place, there ended up being allegations of abuse by the mom's boyfriend, and then the complicity of the girl's mom that were made, and there were official charges made against both of them. And
Unreal.
that's what led to that's what led to the custody change. But kind of the climax of that story is that about a few months after the charges were made, they were each arrested. They were both released on bail. The girl's mom committed suicide.
Oh, man.
And so I have full custody based on the fact that I'm their only parent at this point, but that was kind of the situation that led up to it. So now I do still have, I have the 5 girls. 2 of them were older at that point and were no longer living at the house when all of that took place. But it was still just an awful experience and an awful situation. And as hard as it was for me, I knew that it was 10 times more difficult for the girls. And so, all of these things that I'm talking about, all of these stories and all of these situations and experiences that I've had are all things that have kind of contributed to where I am today. And I firmly believe that everything that happens to us happens for a reason, and we can figure out a way to turn it into something good. And again, I would never say that situation was good, or that the things that happened to my daughters was good. That's not what I would say. And when I was in the middle of that situation, when my dad or friends would say, you know what, Rob, you wouldn't be put in this situation if you weren't strong enough to handle it, or, things like that, I did not want to hear it. I wanted to punch him in the throat and get him out of my face, because that's not how I felt in that moment. And so I'm not implying that. But over time, as we all started to heal and we all started to kind of get the help that we needed, my girls especially, and we started to move back into our routine, and my daughters have moved into a place of being happy and healthy and, really doing well. I'm able to look back and say, you know what, I've experienced some unique things, and my family's experienced some unique things, and we've come out on the other side of it in a pretty good spot. And so maybe I can find a way to use this to help other men or to help other fathers that are out there. Now, I'm not implying that there's a long list of single dads out there that have experienced this exact situation, but we've all experienced a really difficult event that has taken place. I've heard them on your podcast over and over again. We've all experienced these really, really difficult times when we felt like, I am not equipped to get through this, or we thought, or we had no idea how we were going to get through it. We've all been in a situation like that that's extremely difficult, and we don't know how we're going to get through it. We don't know how we're going to come out on the other side, and we question whether or not we are capable of helping bring our kids through this. And so I think people can relate to that. I think people can relate to the pain, and people can relate to the trauma, even if they can't relate to that exact situation.
And it's great to hear that your daughters are, kind of bounced back from all of that. Them going through that, and then the death of their mom, did they kind of like fall even in a deeper depression and slump, or were they able to kind of bounce back quicker? Because that's rough for kids.
Yeah, it's been a process. It's been a long journey. And so that now it's now been, at the time we're recording this, it's been almost exactly 6 years since the suicide took place. And
yeah.
So we've had some time. At that time they were ages 8 to 22. And so a completely kind of different points in their life of where they are now. It was really hard. It was really hard for them as far as how they responded. Fortunately, they were all they were already seeing counselors. We already kind of had systems in place to help support them prior to their mom dying. And so we're blessed. I mean, I was blessed that they already had that in place. If they hadn't, it would have been even more difficult. But that's not to dismiss everything that they've gone through. So
Right.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I won't say that they completely fell apart, but there was months of it being extremely difficult. And, I shouldn't even talk about it as if it's in past tense, because this is something we are still dealing with right now. And this is something that my daughters in particular will probably be dealing with for the rest of their life. So things that happened, things that we had worked through when they were 8, 9, 10, 11, or even 16, 17 for some of them, as they start to enter into a relationship, they're going to feel differently about that situation and need to go back and do some work, and it could affect them. When they become moms themselves, their view of this is going to change considerably. And so it's not really in past tense, and I'm not implying that there's not still struggles with them. I just feel that based on everything that's happened, I'm very thankful. I feel very fortunate that they are in as good of a place that they are.
Yeah, and especially 5 of them.
Yeah.
So that, yeah. If you could give some advice to some dads out there, what would it be?
Oh, wow. There's so many ways I could go with this. I think the top piece of advice I would give is that time matters. The amount of time we spend with our kids matters. And I say this recognizing that a lot of the listeners have a very limited amount of time with their kids. Or they're like, well, Rob, we're fighting for time with our kids. We get that. But I do want to say this. I think that people tend to lean towards trying to have quality time, and they say quality time is more important. Quality time is more important. But I'm here to say that the quantity of time we have with our kids matters, and that we can't do anything about the time that we're not given. But whatever time we do have, we can choose to maximize that, and we can choose to make the most of that. And if we're sitting in a place where we are angry or resentful or bitter, it becomes very difficult to be the best version of ourselves for our kids. And so I understand how we get there, but I just want to encourage people to really take some time to invest in themselves also. It's very easy to be doing everything they can for their kids and feel like I'm in a tornado here. I have no time for myself. But your kids need you to be taking care of yourself. And you kind of spoke about this earlier, actually, when you talked about how just as you started to spend more time with your daughter, and she said, you know what, I don't want you to tell me everything that I need to do and this and that. Then she started sharing more personal things. That probably wasn't a situation that you're able to sit there and say, you know what, I'm going to create this quality moment with my daughter. But simply being present and putting her in an environment where she felt safe and secure allowed that quality moment to take place. And I think that's really what we should be striving for.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, this was an amazing episode. I hope that a lot of dads get something out of this. I thought this was great. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing your story.
Thank you, Dan. I really appreciate you having me on.
Awesome. And if you just want to shout out your podcast again on here, so people can jump over and take a listen as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. It is called The Business of Being Dad, and it's on Apple, Spotify, all the normal streaming networks. And I'll just say real quick, if you go into the show notes of any of those episodes, you will find links to my website, or to be able to jump on a call with me if you're interested. And there's, occasionally I'll throw some freebies on there as well. So I would love for people to check it out.
You can't hold me down. You can't hold me down. you can't hold me down. You